Welcome back. So for today's deep dive, we are pulling from a remarkably dense stack of source material.
It really is. It's massive.
Yeah, it's the recently declassified contents of case file number 07 Omega, which, if you've been following this stuff, you know is a big deal.
Oh, absolutely. It's kind of the holy grail of anomalous events.
Right. And we're looking at historical records spanning centuries, military blueprints from the 1940s, primary source journals, and some highly technical forensic data gathered just a few months ago, like January 2026.
By the Strange Phenomena Investigation Team, yeah.
Exactly. So our mission here today is to synthesize all these disparate documents for you. But we are not treating this as, like, a piece of folklore or a campfire ghost story.
Right. No.
We are applying the strict analytical lens of an active field investigator looking at a temporal anomaly. We want to figure out the exact mechanics of what happened to 17 individuals who just, well, vanished into thin air.
And doing that requires us to completely abandon the standard forensic framework, of spatial logic.
Meaning what, exactly?
Well, in a traditional missing persons case, the investigator looks for a vector, a starting point, a path of travel, a destination.
Right, like footprints or tire tracks.
Exactly. You look for footprints, maybe a disturbed branch, heat signatures leaving a perimeter. You're relying on the absolute law that objects move through three-dimensional space over a linear progression of time.
Which is usually a pretty safe bet.
Usually, yeah. But Case File 07 Omega forces us to investigate a scenario where the environment itself violates that linear progression. The baseline physics are just completely compromised.
Okay, so to give you all a clear picture of the environment we are analyzing here, the location is the Saint-Jude orphanage. And it's situated on this incredibly isolated cliff face high up in the French Alps.
Very remote.
Yeah. And in the winter of 1964, a massive snowstorm effectively sealed the building off from the rest of the mountain. So we are looking at a classic locked room scenario, but like on a geographical scale.
Which is terrifying when you think about it.
Totally. And inside that locked room, 14 children and 3 nuns disappeared. Just gone.
Without a single trace.
Right. And the local authorities eventually broke through the heavy wooden doors days later, and they were expecting to find, an abandoned freezing ruin.
Which makes sense given the weather.
Yeah. But instead, they walked into a building where the hearth fires were still burning actively. And the soup on the dining tables was still hot, like emitting steam.
And see, that specific detail, the thermal retention of the environment, that is our first hard forensic data point.
Because of the heat.
Right. Hot soup and burning logs provide a highly measurable decay rate of heat. A standard police force looks at that thermal data and assumes, well, the occupants must have fled moments before the doors were breached.
But the perimeter check contradicted that entirely, didn't it?
Completely.
Because there wasn't a single footprint in the 3 feet of snow surrounding the building. No disturbed snowdrifts on the roof, no broken windows, nothing.
Not a single sign of physical exit.
And then there's the temporal signature. Because every single clock in the facility, from the massive grandfather clocks to the little mechanical wristwatches left in the nuns' quarters, they had all stopped at exactly 3814 a.m.
Right. All of them.
But the weird part is, the police reports document a distinct rhythmic ticking echoing through the empty corridors, though all the gears were frozen.
Yeah, the local gendarmerie labeled it the heartbeat of abandoned time.
Which is super poetic, but
scientifically imprecise. Yeah. I mean, it's an evocative phrase, sure. But to understand the mechanics of that ticking and the disappearance itself, we actually can't start our investigation in 1964.
We have to go back further.
Way further. If you want to understand a structural collapse, you have to look at the foundation. The 1964 event was the catastrophic failure, sure. But the stress fractures in the timeline of this location began centuries earlier.
So we need to follow the chronological evidence from the dossier, right?
Yeah.
Beginning with the land's initial development. And the archives trace the original construction of the building back to the 18th century, long before it was converted into an orphanage.
Right. It was initially a private workspace.
Yeah, built as a workshop for an independent horologist, a watchmaker. And the church inquisitorial notes from that era indicate this craftsman was eventually arrested and accused of witchcraft.
Which, is pretty common back then for anyone doing advanced science.
Right. But the specific accusation was that he was attempting to trap the souls of the dead inside the intricate gears of his timepieces. And he was doing this to achieve immortality.
Okay, so we have to filter that archaic 18th century terminology through a modern investigative lens. Like,
Strip away the superstitious.
exactly. Words like witchcraft and soul trapping, those are just pre-scientific descriptors. The observers simply lacked the vocabulary to articulate what they were seeing.
So what was actually happening?
Well, we need to look at what a watchmaker actually does mechanically. Horology is basically the mastery of kinetic energy, tension, and release, calibrated to measure the flow of time. It is the artificial compartmentalization of entropy.
Okay, let's unpack this for a second.
Yeah.
Because the dossier includes sketches of his mechanisms. They weren't your standard escapements or pendulum systems, right?
No, not at all.
He was using these highly unconventional, non-Euclidean gear trains and casting components out of extremely dense, esoteric alloys.
Which is not how you build a standard grandfather clock.
Right. So is it possible this wasn't magic at all, but like a primitive accidental discovery of temporal physics?
Mhm.
Like a medieval doctor discovering penicillin by accident and calling it a miracle.
That is a perfect analogy, yes. He wasn't just measuring time. The mathematics in his surviving notebooks suggest he was attempting to build a machine that could actively alter the localized gravitational and electromagnetic fields through mechanical resonance.
Oh, wow. So he was actually manipulating gravity.
Essentially, yes. He was inducing what we now classify as temporal friction by pushing those dense, intricately calibrated kinetic systems beyond standard operational thresholds.
He was stressing the environment.
Exactly. He was creating a severe drag coefficient against the fabric of space-time itself. Think about the sheer kinetic torque required to manipulate a localized gravitational field.
It would be immense.
Right, so the watchmaker didn't trap a soul. His obsessive mechanical experiments likely created a micro-tear in the temporal membrane of that specific geographical coordinate.
He essentially drilled a microscopic hole in the timeline.
That's exactly what he did.
So he turned the physical location into this localized anomaly magnet.
Yeah.
And for a couple of centuries, I mean, it might have manifested as barely perceptible environmental quirks.
Right, what kind of quirk?
Oh, like milk spoiling at an accelerated rate or ambient sounds echoing a fraction of a second out of phase. Little things people would just brush off as a drafty old house.
Right, right.
But the underlying structural integrity of reality in that specific spot was fundamentally compromised.
It was a compromised foundation, and it sat relatively dormant until the military intervention of 1940.
Right, World War II.
Yeah. This is the inflection point where the timeline escalates from a passive leak to an active, uncontained rupture.
So what happened in 1940?
Well, the declassified military intelligence reports in the dossier detail the requisitioning of the Saint-Jude basement during the height of the war. The French military was anticipating heavy aerial bombardment, right?
Naturally.
So they established a clandestine research division down there to develop theoretical defense technologies.
And the project they initiated was a temporal camouflage generator, which honestly sounds like straight-up science fiction until you read the schematics.
Oh, the schematics are fascinating.
Yeah, because they weren't trying to build a time machine like H.G. Wells or something. They were attempting to engineer a massive, high-voltage electromagnetic stasis field.
A time freeze device.
Exactly. The theory was that by generating a specific oscillating electromagnetic frequency, they could disrupt the local flow of time within a really tight focus radius, effectively freezing the orphanage in place.
So if a bomber drops its payload,
The explosives pass straight through the temporal footprint without detonating, or without even interacting with the physical structure, because the building is held out of phase with the present moment.
it's actually brilliant in theory. The physics underlying that theory, utilizing rotating magnetic fields to bend local space-time, they're surprisingly sound.
But the application?
The application was dangerously brute force. I mean, they constructed this massive generator utilizing raw, unrefined power sources to just force an artificial temporal bubble into existence.
And they had no idea about the virologist, right?
Exactly. They failed to account for the pre-existing temporal friction established by the 18th century watchmaker.
Oh, man.
Yeah. They were attempting to inflate a high-pressure stasis bubble inside a container that already had a structural fracture.
Which is a recipe for disaster.
Yeah.
And the general's logs detail the catastrophic failure upon initial activation. The generator didn't create a neat contained bubble of stasis.
Not at all.
The immense electromagnetic torque grabbed that existing microtear and just ripped it wide open.
Tore it to shreds.
Yeah, and the resulting overload killed the engineering team instantly and permanently destabilized the basement.
Yeah.
They didn't just fail to build a shield, they literally blew the doors off the timeline.
resulting in a massive, unclosed time rift. And from a field investigator's perspective, this reclassifies the entire St. Jude orphanage.
How so?
Well, post-1940, it is no longer merely a physical building. It operates as a leaking temporal reactor.
A reactor, wow.
Yeah. The basement rift is actively venting high-density temporal radiation into the upper floors, and this radiation saturates the wood, the stone, the soil, and crucially, it begins to interact with the biological organisms inhabiting the space.
The kids.
Yeah.
And the nuns.
Exactly.
Which brings us to arguably the most vital primary source document in the entire dossier, the one chronicling the escalation phase right up to the 1964 disappearance, Sister Claire's diary.
Oh, the diary. Yeah.
And just the recovery of this journal is an anomaly in itself. The 2026 SBIT team found it secreted inside the casing of a large music box in the common room. But the internal mechanism of the music box, like the brass cylinder, the comb, the gears that are meant to dictate rhythm and time, it had been entirely gutted, just hollowed out to make room for her frantic, deteriorating notes.
Which demonstrates her subconscious recognition of the threat, don't you think?
How do you mean?
Well, she hid her documentation of the temporal collapse inside a destroyed timekeeping device. She knew on some level that time itself was the enemy.
Oh, that is chilling.
Yeah. And the journal provides us with this immediate, observable data on how the environmental radiation systematically dismantled their localized reality over a period of just several weeks.
We can actually track the biological and psychological effects of the exposure.
Step by step.
Right, like the entry dated November 12, 1964. Sister Claire details the initial stages of this environmental desynchronization. She observes a young boy, Leo, who is suffering from severe sleep deprivation.
Because of the clock.
Yeah. He claims the clock on his bedroom wall is talking to him, keeping him awake at night. But the critical detail here is that Sister Claire notes this specific clock has been completely inoperable for over a decade.
It was broken.
The mainspring was totally rusted through, yet Leo insists the second hand is actively moving backward.
And here is where we must analyze the mechanics of an unpowered clock moving in reverse, because it is not operating on kinetic energy from a mainspring.
So what's pushing it?
The metallic components are acting as a passive receiver, like a physical antenna picking up the ambient temporal radiation leaking from the basement rift.
Oh, wow.
The radiation is generating enough localized force to physically turn the gears against their design trajectory.
And the fact that it is moving backward, I mean, that indicates a severe inversion of local entropy, right?
Precisely.
Because the natural progression of a closed system is toward disorder over a forward progression of time. If the mechanical energy is driving that second hand backward, the localized flow of time in that specific room is literally folding in on itself.
Collapsing.
Yeah. And furthermore, Leah's assertion that the clock is talking to him. Here's where it gets really interesting.
Yeah.
Because that points to a terrifying neurological symptom of the radiation. The environment is actively turning against them.
It points to environmental synchronization. See, the human brain interprets sensory input through neural frequencies.
Right.
If the physical room is vibrating with an inverted temporal resonance, the child's auditory cortex is attempting to process that raw, paradoxical data.
So he's not actually hearing a voice.
No, he isn't hearing a voice. His brain is translating the aggressive desynchronization of his local timeline into a rhythmic, invasive frequency that he just perceives as communication.
So his biological rhythm is literally being forced to align with the anomaly.
Exactly.
That is terrifying.
Yeah.
And that desynchronization transitions from an auditory hallucination to a glaring physical impossibility just a week later by November 20.
The shadow incident.
Yes. This entry details a daytime observation. Sister Claire writes, quote, "The children are out in the yard playing in the snow, but their shadows remain inside the hallway," end quote.
Which is just...
I mean, this isn't a trick of the light. She is describing a complete decoupling of physical mass from visual data.
And the mechanics of that decoupling are fascinating from a field perspective, because visual data relies on light propagating through space-time.
Right.
If the children are 50 yards away in the courtyard, but their shadows are still cast on the floor of the interior hallway, we are witnessing a severe temporal echo.
Like a lag.
Exactly. The density of the time rift is so extreme that the light capturing their physical presence is lagging hours behind their actual movement. The local space-time is acting like a viscous fluid, slowing the transmission of the visual event.
It's like having a bad internet connection, but in real life.
That's a great way to put it.
But the visual lag is only half of the terrifying equation here. because Sister Claire records that these disconnected shadows in the hallway are actively interacting with a secondary anomaly. Right, the entity.
Yeah. She describes a tall, invisible entity on the ceiling. The shadows of the children are playing with something that has no physical mass in the current timeline.
And to understand the presence of this entity, we actually have to cross-reference the church's classified architectural mandate for the orphanage.
Which was buried in the archives.
Deep in the archives. The Archdiocese established a strict charter dictating that Saint-Jude could house a maximum of 14 children.
Never 15.
Never 15. The hidden archives contain centuries-old documentation warning against the manifestation of a 15th child.
And the archives describe it not as a human, but as a predator.
Right.
A creature that disguises itself to infiltrate the population and harvest the lifespan of the residents to, feed the structural foundation of the building.
Which sounds crazy until you apply field logic to that archaic myth, because then it aligns perfectly with the biological mechanics of a temporal anomaly.
So what is it really? It is an ecological response. Look, the 1940 military experiment created a leaking reactor, an environment completely saturated with raw chronological energy.
Right.
In nature, when a dense, unexploited energy source is exposed, an organism eventually adapts to consume it.
Oh, I see.
This 15th child entity is a creature of pure temporal mechanics. It operates outside of our three-dimensional phase space. It exists on the periphery, up on the ceiling, interacting with the delayed temporal footprints of the children.
So it's an apex predator of time.
Yeah.
Essentially grazing on their temporal echoes to test the structural integrity of their timeline.
It's assessing the caloric value of their futures.
That is so deeply unsettling. And this feeding cycle catalyzes the total systemic collapse documented in the final journal entry on November 30.
The physical state of that page alone is wild.
Yeah, the paper itself is physically warped, the ink smeared by what the 2026 forensics team actually confirmed were dried human tears.
She was terrified.
Absolutely. Because Sister Claire is no longer just observing the anomaly by this point. She's undergoing active formatting.
Formatting is the precise term here, yeah.
She looks into the bathroom mirror and visualizes herself exactly as she appeared 10 years prior.
Because the temporal radiation is actively refracting her personal continuity, she is maintaining her present adult cognitive state, but her optical receptors are forced to process a past iteration of her physical form.
So the timeline is no longer just leaking. It is actively rewriting the biological data of the inhabitants.
Yes.
And it strips them of their human metadata. She documents that the children have entirely lost the concept of their own identities. They don't recognize human names anymore.
They're just numbers.
Yeah, they're referring to each other strictly by intervals of time. 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock. The entity isn't just confusing them. It is wiping their cognitive hard drives.
Right, because before the localized anomaly can assimilate them, it must reduce them to compatible energy.
Right.
Names, memories, personal histories. These are abstract human constructs. The anomaly requires pure kinetic chronological fuel.
So by erasing their identities...
By erasing their identities and replacing them with numerical time intervals, the entity is translating their consciousness into the mechanical language of the rift.
Wow. It's like a parasite taking over a host's nervous system. The people aren't just trapped in the building. They're becoming biological components of the building's broken clockwork.
That's exactly it. And the ultimate proof of this assimilation is the final physical symptom Sister Claire records.
The ticking.
Yes, the ticking sound that had been echoing from the walls has relocated. She writes, "It is echoing from inside our own chests."
Oh man, that makes my skin crawl.
The temporal parasite has successfully overridden their autonomic nervous systems. Their cardiovascular functions have been completely subsumed.
So their hearts aren't beating normally.
No, their hearts are no longer pumping blood to sustain biological life. They are oscillating to regulate the local time field. They've been fully integrated into the circuitry of the anomaly.
Which provides the complete mechanical explanation for the forensic paradox the police discovered when they breached the doors a few weeks later.
The frozen scene.
Exactly. The roaring fires, the hot soup, the undisturbed snow outside. Standard investigators looked for a spatial exit and found none, because they failed to recognize that the victims didn't travel through space.
They didn't walk out. They were instantly displaced through time.
Or excised from the continuity entirely.
Right. The thermal retention of the soup and the fire wasn't maintained because the occupants had recently fled. The heat was preserved because, within the spatial confines of that dining hall, the forward progression of time necessary for thermal decay simply ceased.
The millisecond the event triggered.
Exactly.
The exact millisecond that every timepiece in the building locked at 3:13 a.m.
Right, and the synchronization of those clocks wasn't a mechanical failure. It was the moment the harvest reached critical mass.
So 3:14 a.m. is not a time of death.
No, biological death requires a progression of time to occur. You can't die without time moving forward. 3:14 a.m. marks the precise coordinate when the temporal frequencies of those 17 individuals fully desynchronized from our base reality.
Okay, so what actually happened to them?
The 15th child entity consumed their remaining chronological potential. It converted 17 human futures into a massive burst of raw mechanical energy to feed the basement rift.
And then
The localized temporal field collapsed inward, violently taking the victims with it.
leaving nothing behind but the phantom ticking, just this rhythmic sound with absolutely no moving gears to produce it.
And that ticking is the acoustic exhaust of the energy conversion.
Exhaust.
Yeah. The first law of thermodynamics dictates that energy cannot be destroyed, only transformed. The chronological potential of those 17 lives was violently compressed into a localized, infinitely repeating temporal loop.
So the phantom ticking is.
It is the audible friction of their converted lifespans endlessly grinding against the temporal barrier.
That is just bleak. So for over 60 years, the church quarantined the site. It just sat sealed in the fog on that cliff, a literal dead zone. But the dossier brings us to January 2026, when the Strange Phenomena Investigation Team, or SPIT, was finally authorized to breach the perimeter. And they used state-of-the-art forensic technology,
That's
right?
best year available.
Their objective was to measure the residual footprint of the anomaly, just to see what was left. But instead, they discovered the reactor is still fully operational.
Very much so. And the physical evidence they recovered entirely corroborates the theory of a violent temporal conversion.
Like a silver dust.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The crime scene technicians meticulously swept the floors for standard biological markers. DNA, hair follicles, dermal tissue from potential intruders.
And they found nothing.
The results were entirely negative. However, they discovered the entire floor plan was coated in this microscopic layer of shimmering silver dust.
And the lab results on that silver dust were just staggering. Because it wasn't an organic compound or like structural debris from the ceiling. It was quartz, crushed at the atomic level.
Yep.
And for anyone analyzing temporal mechanics, quartz is the absolute smoking gun. Why is quartz so crucial here?
Because of its piezoelectric properties. Quartz is the fundamental anchor for precision timekeeping.
Right.
When you introduce an electrical current to a quartz crystal, it oscillates at a rigidly precise frequency, typically 32,768 times per second.
Okay.
That unchanging vibration is what tethers a clock to objective, real-world time. It's the anchor.
Got it. And the SPIT team confirmed that the quartz oscillators inside every single frozen clock, pendulum, and wristwatch in the building had been systematically targeted.
And obliterated.
Yeah. The torque generated by the temporal rift collapsing inward was of such an immense magnitude that it bypassed the glass casings and the metal gears, directly attacking the atomic lattice of the timekeeping materials.
The anomaly essentially severed the physical anchors, tethering the orphanage to our reality.
Which is an incredibly violent mechanical statement. Like, it wanted to be untethered.
Completely.
But the acoustic anomaly data the SPIT team captured is even more profound, I think.
Oh, the audio recordings.
Yeah. They deployed this matrix of ultra-sensitive seismic microphones throughout the silent corridors. These are instruments designed to detect tectonic whispers kilometers underground.
Very high-end stuff.
Right. And at normal playback, the audio files just registered a persistent low-frequency drone, almost imperceptible to the human ear. But when the lab technicians artificially compressed the audio, speeding the playback up by 400%.
They documented the most chilling piece of empirical evidence in the entire case file.
Because the drone resolved into the distinct overlapping laughter of hundreds of children, seamlessly interwoven with that metallic ticking.
Clear as day.
Clear as day, just stretched to an extreme distortion. Wait, so they sped it up and heard the children from 1964?
Yes. This acoustic data confirms the mechanics of extreme time dilation within the anomaly. The energetic signatures of the victims are permanently trapped in that localized loop.
So they're still in there.
They are. A single second of subjective experience for those trapped entities, like a moment of laughter, takes days or even weeks to propagate through the warped spacetime and register on our microphones.
Wow.
From their localized perspective, the event is occurring in real time. But from our external vantage point, their timeline is stretched so thin across the temporal spectrum that the frequency drops way below the threshold of human hearing.
So by artificially speeding the audio up by 400%, the technicians briefly realigned their distorted timeline with our own.
Exactly.
They are experiencing a frozen eternity in the microscopic fractions of our passing seconds.
It's horrifying.
And this SBIT's biological telemetry proves that the anomaly is actively trying to pull new material into that loop, doesn't it?
Oh, it's still hunting.
Because the moment the investigators crossed the threshold, their modern digital equipment, smartphones, encrypted trackers, internal chronometers, they all began accelerating, running 15 minutes fast for every single hour of exposure.
Right. The local field actively accelerates the mechanical processes of any foreign object introduced to the environment. But the physiological impact on the human body is even more catastrophic.
Yeah, let's talk about the biological effects.
Well, the dossier includes the medical evaluation of an investigator who volunteered for a stationary 12-hour observation shift in the main dining hall.
Just sitting there for one night.
Just one night of objective time. But he emerged exhibiting 3 months of cellular growth.
That is insane.
His hair, his nails, his internal metabolic markers. They all indicated 90 days of biological aging while the sun only completed a single rotation outside.
So his biology was completely divorced from chronological reality.
Totally divorced.
And the spatial gradient of that dilation is incredibly erratic, depending on where you are in the building, because there was another two-person team that descended toward the basement, aiming for the epicenter of that 1940 military experiment.
The hot zone.
Right. And they maintained radio silence for exactly 30 minutes, according to their analog backup watches before they extracted.
30 minutes?
Yeah, but when they re-entered the courtyard, they found the base camp in a state of absolute panic because they had been missing from objective reality for 72 hours.
Right. 30 minutes of subjective operation equates to 3 days of objective time loss.
So the closer you approach the original rift, the steeper the time dilation gradient becomes.
Exponentially steeper, yeah.
Furthermore, the environmental probing that was documented by Sister Claire back in the 60s, it's still actively manifesting today. The investigators' analog timepieces began reversing, and they were placed under strict operational mandates to avoid looking into any reflective surfaces.
Which is standard protocol now for temporal hazards.
Because the agents who inadvertently caught their reflections documented severe visual desynchronization, right?
Yes. They reported seeing their bodies in advanced stages of necrotic decay. Or even worse, perceiving a shadowy void, an unborn state where their reflection should be.
So the environment is constantly scanning them, probing their personal timelines for structural weaknesses, attempting to format them just as it did the children in 1964.
It's looking for a way in.
Exactly. So when we compiled the totality of case file, #07Omega, the 18th century horological experiments, the catastrophic 1940 military stasis failure, the biological assimilation by the 15th child entity, the pulverized quartz, and the severe time dilation affecting modern instruments. What is the definitive forensic conclusion here?
Well, the conclusion requires a complete paradigm shift in how we classify anomalous zones. Saint-Jude Orphanage is not a static historical crime scene.
No.
It is not an abandoned structure haunted by a past tragedy. It is a highly efficient, fully functional predatory machine.
So what you're saying is the 17 victims were not murdered in any traditional sense.
Right, because murder implies an intentional cessation of biological life driven by human malice. The victims at St. Jude were consumed as fuel for an ongoing mechanical process.
Let me make sure I have this straight. The 18th century watchmaker unknowingly designed the conceptual blueprint, grinding the initial temporal friction into the geography.
Right.
And then the 1940 military stasis experiment served as the ignition, catastrophically blowing open the localized timeline.
Exactly.
Then the 15th child entity evolved as the biological catalyst, the apex predator adapting to format and herd the raw material.
Yep.
And finally, the 17 individuals in 1964 functioned as the necessary battery. Their lifespans were systematically converted into the kinetic energy required to stabilize the basement rift.
That is the perfect summary, yes.
And the SBIT's data proves the machine never powered down. It is just sitting there on that freezing cliff face, ticking endlessly, maintaining its stasis, waiting for a new external power source to wander in and synchronize with his gears.
Which forces us to reconsider our fundamental relationship with time itself.
How do you mean?
Well, we treat time as a sterile, linear path that we just passively travel along. We assume we command it because, we build the devices that measure it.
Sure, we wear it on our wrists.
Right. But the physics of St. Jude suggests that time can pool, it can fracture, and under the right mechanical pressures, it can actively consume.
We are not measuring time. We are merely providing it with a metronome.
That's exactly it. And if we look closely at the mechanical logic driving the St. Jude anomaly, it leaves us with an incredibly disturbing implication regarding the future of the site.
Which is what?
Well, think about it. The entire 1964 event, the formatting of the children, the temporal collapse, the conversion of 17 lifespans into mechanical energy, that was the anomaly inhaling.
Inhaling.
Yes, it was drawing power inward to stabilize the military rift. But the 2026 SPIT team noted that their devices were actively accelerating, and time within the perimeter was moving faster relative to the outside world.
Meaning the internal pressure is building.
Precisely. If an anomaly of that magnitude has spent the last 60 years inhaling compressed time, converting centuries of human chronological potential into raw, tightly coiled mechanical tension.
Wow.
Yeah. What exactly happens to the localized fabric of reality when the machine finally reaches maximum capacity and is forced to exhale?
That is a terrifying thought. And it brings us to a final, provocative point for you to mull over. If time is indeed a mechanical pressure that can pool and fracture, it might not just be confined to isolated orphanages in the Alps.
No, it wouldn't be.
So if you ever find yourself sitting quietly in your own home and you hear a faint, rhythmic ticking coming from behind the walls where you know there are no clocks.
Do not tap along with it.
Right. Do not try to count the rhythm. Because as the mechanics of St. Jude prove, matching the frequency of the clock might just be the very thing that invites the mechanism to pull you in.